122, he seeks our good. The Psalm of David is a beautiful psalm, a psalm full of peace and joy. I remember too many times in my life where I've gone into a church and didn't have peace or joy, but felt more anxious and fearful and even some kind of intimidated. And this is what I mean by that. I think in past times I've viewed going into church kind of like a courtroom. And I think many people think of it as that way because you're entering into where God is and you start thinking about, oh, is he going to be upset? Because you know internally there's something wrong. And whether you believe in God or not, there's this internal clock that God's given us, the laws that he's placed in our heart to help us understand right from wrong. And so we have this conviction. And when we're going into the courtroom, into the church, we are feeling like a convict, that we're going there for judgment. And it's kind of like when, have you ever been caught red-handed by your parents and you're just in this like, oh my gosh, like my mom and dad just found out, and you're just caught red-handed, like you just want to leave, like you want to get out. I think church can sometimes feel that way for people, and maybe you have felt that way, or maybe you even do right now. What's beautiful about this psalm, Psalm 122, is that it's a psalm of David. He's a king over Israel, a judge, a ruler who determines what's right, what's wrong, what's going to happen, what's not going to happen. And so I love this psalm because David gives us a little insight into the throne of God. Meaning, when we enter into church or when we read God's word, what's God going to do? What's he going to say? How does he view us? And he gives us this insight. I find it in verse 9. It's the last verse, and it says this: "For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good." What's beautiful about that is I believe David is representing the way that God approaches us when we're before him. I think many times when you're going into the court, you see in the verses before, it says that there's a throne, the judgment seat of David, the throne of David. Many times we go there and David knew people would come to him just scared out of their mind because they knew that he got to determine what was going to happen. And so they felt this judgment and they felt this fearfulness and anxiety. And I think David saw that in his people, but he also experienced it for himself. You see, there was a moment in time where David had sinned against God and against others. He knows sin because he's an adulterer, he's a murderer, he covered all of that up so that no one would find out. And yet God called out to him. And in a moment where God called out to him, he felt God's judgment, kind of like a stroke of a pen, like he sees the judgment of God written down, but in that same stroke, he experienced the grace and mercy of God. It's a beautiful story because many times we approach church thinking, oh man, what is God gonna do? I might not even believe in him, but there's this fearfulness of uncertainty. And what's awesome is David experienced the goodness of God in that moment where God convicted him of doing wrong, showing him, telling him this is not okay, and yet showing him grace and mercy by allowing him to still be king, having beautiful kids, and many of them, to be a great warrior still. You see, God still blessed him, and that's not how it always goes for everybody, but there's still that grace and mercy that God gives you, and you never know how that's going to pan out. And so growing up, going into church, that's how I felt because I knew I had done things that were wrong in God's eyes, and I would walk into church just fearful. But as I've learned more about the gospel of Jesus, knowing that Jesus lived a life that I couldn't live of perfection, like he lived perfectly before the Father, and then laid down his life, gave up his life on the cross so that he could pay the penalty for my sin and the world's sins, showing that we can have forgiveness, but also be given new life as he's been resurrected. We too are given that new life. So as a Christian, when I was younger, I would walk into church still feeling that kind of timid, just nervous. But as I've walked with God over the past 20 years, I've realized more and more how rich God is in his grace and mercy. And why? Because he seeks our good. That doesn't seem logical to us. It doesn't make sense. But if, as a parent, when my kids do something wrong, my intention is to let them know what's wrong, but also be gracious and merciful to them, to give them things that they don't deserve, and to withhold judgment or punishment to them for what they really do deserve. And as a parent, you start learning more and more about what it means, how God views his kids. Because when we believe in Jesus and what he's done for us, we become a son or a daughter of God, and God treats us that way. So when you enter into church next time, or if you've never been to church, just know that God is always seeking your good. It doesn't mean that it's what you think is good, it's what he says is best for you. Well, I hope that encourages you somehow. Maybe you will join with us in just reading Psalm 122 on your own, and then comment below what stuck out to you. What did God show you through this psalm? Also, I put in the notes, there's a song that I've given a link to. It's called Jerusalem. It's by City of Light, and I think it's pretty sweet. Well, thanks for joining with us today. I will see you tomorrow on our next day as we look at Psalm 123. We'll see you later.